think Art would fill the bill. And I'm just going to list a couple. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, owner of the Montgomery County newspapers that we miss sorely. He's running a couple of biotech companies, all of that, and he's most passionate about beekeeping. So we decided to invite Art. As he is the local beekeeper, his honey is for sale out there, and I want each of you to buy some of his honey. Edian Rodriguez is the master beekeeper at Erdenheim Farms, and so we're so lucky to have him here. Next year, he's going to help us set up a couple of hives in the community gardens. Some of you had expressed interest in that, and we discovered that there's some misunderstanding about bees, so he's going to dispel all of those misunderstandings. And we're delighted to have him here. He's a very busy guy. So I'd like you to clap.
Thank you. I'll start off and sort of run through a few slides here and let Edian, who is the master beekeeper, fill out the program. I'm a beekeeper mostly because I actually I think it's sort of a spiritual thing to do. It's once you start doing it, it's so endlessly fascinating, and there's so many facets to it. And bees, honeybees, are so smart, capable, and industrious, and they produce honey. Slow down here a bit. I started thinking about this years ago when I started beekeeping, and come to find out that beekeeping really has its roots in the many religions of the world, starting with the Asian religions, the Middle Eastern religions. Egypt, they were huge beekeepers, and of course into the medieval period, and ultimately to the United States. Beekeeping was tied to faith. Certainly Judaism, Islam, there's references to bees, beekeeping throughout. Some of the symbolism of bees was a huge constant theme through all of the religions. The bees were the emblems of purity, resurrection, divine order, and the clergy, the religious people noted that the organization and the process that bees go through, that we'll talk about, and Edian especially will fill you in on it. It's fascinating how they do it. The Egyptians used honey for all sorts of things. They felt it was a symbol of rejuvenation and immortality. Amazingly, honey, which is antimicrobial and antibacterial, it doesn't ever go bad. Honey kept in urns in the Egyptian pyramids is still edible after 3,000 years. Okay. The Greeks and the Romans, beekeeping was a huge pastime. Aristotle was the first, major thinker in Western thought, and he observed the bees as a sort of a blend of science and spirituality, which I think is a constant theme through all of it. Here is actually, they found evidence that the Greeks built early apiaries to keep the bees. And you can see it here, they did it out of stone, which was sort of a precursor to what happened in Europe centuries later. Judaism, very, very popular. We just, Rosh Hashanah, there's a very large part of it is dipping bread into the honey, is celebrating the selfless bees. They found apiaries, evidence of apiaries dating back 900 BC in northern Israel. Early Christianity, the Bible is filled with references to bees, their purity, virginity, resurrection. There's even a patron saint of bees, St. Ambrose of Milan. And the story in the Bible is that he was covered with bees and he did not get stung, and the bees left a single droplet of honey on his face. Edian and I actually have been through that and had bees all over us and never been stung, so I can attest that that's possible. The medieval monasteries, the clergy there, they were the real keepers of modern sustainers of beekeeping. And the early laws of the medieval era involved, interestingly, they involved the very thorny issue of when bees swarm to go find another home, bees will go and swarm and they'll go up into a branch or something and they wait there, and skilled beekeepers can tease them into a box or a container and keep them, and actually then the bees will produce honey for them. So early swarms were very, very valuable. But some of the first laws were about who owns the swarm that came from your property, but the swarm flew over to my property, and how do we resolve that? Charlemagne ordered that all states, he understood implicitly the value of bees. Everybody was required to keep bees, and 2/3 of the honey had to be given to him, so he was in Christian history, beeswax. I didn't bring any. Did you bring any wax with you today?
No, it's on the
Okay. The beeswax is really, was candles, and the reason was it doesn't smoke and it burns slower and more even, I guess is the right term. Again, the monasteries can preserve beekeeping. When the sugar trade exploded in the Western Hemisphere, and monasteries, suddenly sugar became the principal source of sweetness. And it was the monasteries that preserved bees and honey, that sweetness. I think largely because they were using it to make mead and alcoholic beverages, but they sustained beekeeping for hundreds of years. Their technology was really crude. What they would do is you've all seen images of these. They look charming. These grass-woven hives that are they're called steps, and they will house the bees in there, and the bees would produce honey and grow their brood. And the problem was when they came to harvesting the honey, the only way to do it was really to destroy the whole hive and kill it, and create mayhem for the bees and really piss them off, frankly. But it was in the middle of the 1800s, which fascinatingly, the whole technology of modern beekeeping was born about 4 miles from here. And it was a Presbyterian minister, another keeper of bees, a gentleman named Lorenza Langstroth, and you'll hear people like me and Edian talk about a Langstroth hive, which is right here. And he patented the first movable frames. Edian will show you how that works, but the magic of what he discovered was that if you put frames, you space them 3/8 of an inch apart, which is about like that, in a box, then bees will not cross the 3/8 of an inch and create a solid comb, if you catch what I'm trying to describe. Because if you create a solid comb across it, you can't really harvest it without destroying things and ripping it out. So they would produce, and I have some pictures of it, they would produce honey on separate frames. The effect of it was a dramatic increase in efficiency, management. It transformed the entire industry and became the mainstay of modern beekeeping. Sadly, Reverend Langstroth patented his invention, which is basically saying that it's this 3/8 magical 3/8, and the frames. That was the basis of it. Everybody violated the patent, and he never made a nickel out of this, but he built literally a multi-billion-dollar industry. He did write a book that still today is one of the Bibles of beekeeping, and he certainly recognized bees for their contribution to nature and his words, the wisdom of God, who gives them such amazing instincts. One of the key things that I find interesting is that honeybees are some of the smartest creatures on Earth. And they have a brain the size of a millimeter, which is a pencil dot, but the neurons in that pencil dot sized brain are denser than any other creature. So they're processing in that pencil dot amazing amount of information. Bees can learn abstract thoughts. They can remember sequences. They can recognize numbers. They certainly recognize the beekeeper. And Edian and I will attest. I'll have some fun photos here of Edian with no protection at all, with gajillions of bees around him. They know exactly who he is, and they know he's not there to do something that would hurt them. Fascinatingly, I'll go back to this. One of the concepts that I find interesting is they can forage in a 3.5 mile area, bees can. And they come back to the hive, they send out scouts to find out where there's an opportunity, likely a tree or a bush. And it can be 2-3 miles away, and they come back to the hive and they communicate the location of that hive. And then, first of all, the first issue that sort of burns the brain is, well, how do they communicate the location of that hive? Because I could give all of you a GPS device and tell you there's a tree 3.5 miles away. Can you go find that with a GPS device? And I know I would screw it up. I don't think I could. So somehow the bees communicate precisely the location. But the second thing that makes your head explode is that they will communicate the opportunity, the size of the opportunity. Let's say it's a tree that would warrant 100 bees to go to, or a bush that has opportunity for 6 bees. Somehow that message is communicated through the hive. There is nobody in charge of the hive directing, like, you go over here. Nobody's making any decisions, but the hive will then dispatch 100 bees to the tree that requires 100 bees, and 6 to the bush that requires 6. And then you think, well, who made that decision? What about the lazy bee over here who doesn't want to go 2.5 miles? How do you resolve these problems with nobody in charge? And thinking about that one step further, people who do high-end computer technology, certainly AI and some of this new technology is coming out, they think that if they can figure out how the bees in the collective wisdom with nobody in charge make optimal decisions, maybe we could capture that with technology so that we would, could regulate energy, all the things that we need to regulate and that require people and machines to make decisions. So it's a fun thought to think about bees. One of the leaders in the Catholic Church in history said, beekeeping, bees are more honored than any other animal because she labors, and she labors for not for herself but for others. There is no individualism in beekeeping. The bees, beehive, they're the ultimate democracy, I think. No one in charge. We just talked about that. And what can they teach us about teamwork? Fascinating to me. Fun facts about bees. It takes a bee an entire lifetime to make a half a teaspoon of honey. Bees do communicate by dancing, doing something called the waggle dance. The queen bee is there to do nothing but procreate. She creates about 1,500 new brood or eggs every day. So consequently, you can get a hive. That's one of my hives, and I think Edian will recognize that. 60,000 bees in a hive is not that unusual. Here's a shot that I can't show it, but there's a bee doing the waggle dance, and you can kind of see how they communicate. Here's a fun find Waldo. See if you can tell where the queen is. She's right in the center there, and she's distinct. Yep. And I'm cheating because we have a little red dot on her. Here's from my apiary, which is nowhere near as impressive as Edian's, but a friend of mine helping harvest, and that's one of the frames that we're talking about. Here's a nice frame of honey, pure honey, and you can see here's the 3/8 inches that I was talking about between. Now there's a little bit of build over, but if you go down into the hive, there isn't any. It sort of disappears. Here's another frame. You take off the wax and spin it in a device like this and get your honey. And there's a handsome beekeeper, huh? See? No problem. Just think about this. There's probably 30,000 bees between here and here, and there's old Edian cranking away and doing this stuff. So it's pretty impressive. This is a swarm. swarms are healthy. That's a sign that the hive is growing. It's absolutely natural. And when beekeepers hear about a swarm, they drop everything and go try and catch it. Here's another less handsome beekeeper. I like to talk about the benefits of honey, and they're well known. I come out of the biotech industry, and there is literally scientific studies that document that in upper respiratory conditions, honey is a better treatment than many of the antibiotics. So I don't think there's any question that all these benefits that are listed there are real. And if you kind of go in and there's books written on this, and many people that believe this. My honey comes from linden trees primarily, and I'm not sure if there are any linden trees around here, but I'm surrounded, fortunately, with about 60 linden trees. Linden trees are purported to produce nectar that has the highest benefit in honey, and that thinking goes back about 5,500 years. And the internet, there are literally hundreds of sites that talk about early beekeeping and mankind's first medicine, and they claim it's linden honey. So there's linden trees are I'm sure that you have some around here. It takes 2 million flowers of linden tree, and this is what a flower looks like. They're these little beautiful, very fragrant flowers to make a pound of honey. And lastly, I think we all know this, but without these, there would be no apples, pears, melons, almonds, cucumbers. I think the list goes on and on. I don't know that people, understand that. It's frustrating with all these companies that are out with pesticides and trying to exterminate insects. But Albert Einstein said that if the bee disappears from the earth, we would have about 4 years to live, and I believe he's correct. So that's I'll let Edian go on. I brought some of my house linden honey out here, and you can sample it, and I also brought some hot honey, which is what the kids love nowadays. It's the New York Times says it's the fastest growing condiment, and the New York Times gets crazy sometimes. They say it will overtake French dressing.
Great. I have trouble sometimes projecting my voice, so if you need me to talk up, just someone do that. Yeah, I'm a soft speaker, I guess. Super informative. That was great. So I guess I'm here to fill in what Art didn't hit on. So, a correction too that I saw in there, which was fantastic, but the oldest jar of honey was 2,000 years ago, roughly, and from an Egyptian tomb. And they recently found a jar of honey that was in Georgia that dates back to 8,000 years.
Yes.
And it was in a jar with some berries. The berries were perfectly preserved because of the antibacterial, antimicrobial properties of honey, which is pretty neat. It preserved berries to that extent. So beekeeping going all the way back to 10,000 years in cave paintings in Spain. So we do have an in the Langstroth hive, really any wild bee colony, you're gonna have three types of bees inside of it. You're gonna have the worker bee, which is the female bee, and that makes up about 90 to 95% of the hive. These bees are foraging, they're taking care of the young, they're cleaning, they're the bees that take care of the dead bodies, and they also will disinfect the hive. So the females inside of a hive do a tremendous amount of work, and they are the majority of the population. Then you're going to have the drone bees, which are about 5% of the hive, roughly. Those are the male bees, and for better or worse, their job is really just to eat and procreate. At the end of the season, if they don't find a queen to procreate with, then they're actually dragged out of the hive by the female bees and just sort of dumped off. What a way to go. I realize we're in church, but also there's a ton of science behind this. But if they are successful in finding a queen, their phalluses will actually explode and they die in midair. So the death of a joyful death or sort of a miserable,
Lonely.
lonely death. So it's up to you.
So that's some beer, I don't know.
Certainly. And then the third member, who's the most important that everyone's familiar with, is the queen bee. Art sort of spoke to this, that there's this concept of the honeybee sacrificing and doing what's best for the entire hive. And a lot of people have this misunderstanding that the queen is this monarch that dictates to all the other bees what to do, when in fact the relationship is, it's not just amongst each other, but it's tied to nature. A really good example of that would be when the flowers are blooming and there's a high amount of nectar and pollen in the air. When the bees bring it back after foraging, they share this food with one another, and the nursing bees in the hive will actually produce a secretion in their mandible that acts a lot like Red Bull. They give this energy drink to the foraging bees, and it gets them going. They go, wow, okay, all right, you want me to keep doing what I'm doing. So when that secretion is passed throughout the hive, the queen gets wind of it, and she goes, there's plenty of food coming into the beehive. That means that the environment around us is providing for the entire hive. That means I can lay more. So in turn, she begins to lay more. Now, if those foraging bees were having trouble, even if there was plenty of pollen outside, but they were having trouble bringing it in, once they got to the hive, the lack of pollen would then have a lack of this vitellogelin, is the substance, the Red Bull. So there's a lack of that being passed out the hive, and now the queen goes, there's not enough food, the morale could be down, so I'm going to pull back on laying eggs because we want to make sure that the entire community has enough resources and will survive not just throughout the season, but into the winter as well. So, that's just sort of a snippet of the science-y business that happens, but that's also a part of the social structure of the beehive, which I find to be fascinating. So I'm just going to go through what the Langstroth hive is and maybe speak to some things that Art said as well. Pretty remarkable that in 1850, Reverend Lorenzo Langstroth came up with this, because prior to this, the predecessors were, as Art said, they were crushing bees in order to harvest honey. They were drowning them in order to harvest the honey. So there was a lot of bee deaths happening prior to this hive. The issue with that isn't just that we're losing bees in the process, but the amount of energy it takes for a bee to create the wax that you see is tremendous. As Art said, one bee's lifetime is spent collecting about a tablespoon of honey. So when you look at a jar of honey, that's thousands of bees that have spent their lives collecting it. In turn, that honey is actually used as a food source to secrete wax on their bellies or on their abdomens where there's a wax gland, and they take that wax and mold it into all of this wonderful beeswax that we see. If you think about it, again, the lifespan of a bee is going to be anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 months. This is tens of thousands of bees' lives, and probably pounds and pounds of honey that go into creating this. So with the Langstroth hive, we were able to not crush the honey, or not crush the beeswax in order to harvest the honey. We were able to make these, almost like a filing cabinet, these frames. So it was hard to see in that photo, but I'll show you guys what we're talking about. And a beehive is really simple, simply built, the Langstroth hive. It's really just a roof, which is called an outer cover. Okay. We have an inner cover, which has a foyer, if you will, and an entry spot for the bees to come into. And then this is sort of where the meat and potatoes is. We want to start from the bottom up, but in the bottom we have a box that's called a brood box, and that's where the queen bee generally lays all her eggs. And in nature we find this as well, is that the queen bee will lay in the center, generally top to bottom. What the Langstroth hive did was sort of flip it around and say, well, the queen's going to lay in the center, but we're going to start just in the bottom. And everything above this laying chamber or brood box is going to be honey. So you have 10 frames in here, okay? And this is what makes it remarkable, is that prior to this, they had to cut the frames out, again, destroying comb and also killing bees. But with this system, that bee space that Langstroth discovered, we're able to just separate the frames this way and pull them out so we can do inspections, make sure there's no disease, and then in the case of the harvest season, we can pull these frames out that are filled with honey, and we can place them in the extractors that we have without harming any bees or destroying the materials. So, generally, after one box is filled, we'll just keep stacking them up, and then you've got a big old box filled with honey. Pretty simple, and in terms of the construction of it. I brought equipment that was the safety equipment that we would use, and I'm happy to go over that, but really I think I want to speak to this concept of not wearing something and really, when we decide to be shepherds of the bees, there can sometimes be a fear of them. Bees biologically have an imperative, honeybees, to not sting. And part of that is because, as most of us know, when a honeybee stings you, its stinger has a muscle that is pulled from its body and its abdomen, and it dies. Right? So over thousands of years of evolution, bees have figured out that, well, that's a last-ditch effort. So, that's in preservation of keeping the hive alive, to have your life sacrificed, and to basically leave behind the stinger that lets all the other bees know where we should be defending ourselves. Honeybees really go out of their way not to sting you. Usually you'll be head-butted first, they'll make loud buzzing sounds to kind of get you away, but for the most part that's only if a person is attacking the hive, like a beekeeper kind of going in there and knocking things around, or if an individual bee were to feel like it was going to die. When you talk about most stings that people experience, we're talking about wasps from the Vespa family, or hornets. Those insects, over thousands of years of evolution, have learned that they can sting you, and they don't lose their stinger muscles. So their stingers are much like syringes, where they can continue to push it into you and inject venom. So their biological imperative is to be aggressive. Well, we can be aggressive because this is a way of defending ourselves, our nest, but also we still survive. Not the case for honeybees. So when I have a hive at my home or at a friend's house, generally the bees have one direction that they go. It's called their flight path. They go out and forage, they reproduce, they do their business, and there's really never a time where they're threatening anyone. Maybe I said that in a way that says, well, wait, is there ever a time? The only time that bees can be aggressive is if they're defending the hive during the fall season. And even then, that aggression really is exclusive to a beekeeper who's going into the hive itself. So it's perfectly safe to have beehives on your property, whether you're a beekeeper in Philadelphia, like I was in the beginning, keeping bees on your rooftop, in a community filled with folks, or if you're a farmer, kept them in fields, and obviously over at Erdenheim we have beehives as well. And not once have I ever had a civilian, I'll say, get harmed in the process of beekeeping. So I just wanted to make sure that that was sort of addressed, because you can see in those photos I'm not wearing a veil. That was during the harvest season when the bees they can be aggressive, but because me and Art were moving in a certain way, we knew the direction of the flight path that they were taking, and we weren't breathing heavy, which is something we can talk about if folks have questions about the science. But we were doing things in a manner that really ensured that they weren't going to harm us or anyone else around us. And so when the beehive is all locked up, that's double the amount of safety that you generally have. So, trying to think what else. You know, I brought a lot of accoutrement, but Art's his PowerPoint was so informative. I'm really happy to take questions if anyone has. And there's a lot of science in my head when it comes to these. So if you have a question about that, I can also sort of answer.
Can you talk more about the breathing heavy topic that you mentioned?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the defense mechanisms for bees is this heightened absorption of carbon. And one of the reasons for that is that over thousands of years, again with evolution, their main predators, which are mammals, generally will breathe heavy. So, you know, we talk about things like bears, raccoons, honey badgers, if we're going in the US, but also in Africa, if we talk about Africanized bees. And those predators, when they go into a beehive, generally are digging around, they're tearing things up, and they're breathing super heavy. So over time, they become very sensitive to absorbing carbon and being able to detect whether or not there's a predator that's hurting them. So, in turn, as a beekeeper, when we're working the hives, we're maintaining a really even breath. We try not to breathe directly onto the frames. And in that way, it's almost like Tai Chi. You know, you've got to move and breathe in a certain way, where the bees really, they don't, you know, because it's not a heightened amount of carbon being brought on them, they don't mind you. So, it's one of the reasons why. Yeah.
I guess I don't understand when you pull these trays out with honey, aren't the bees in there too? Do they fly out? Or
Yeah, so they will be on it. They will fly around.
Okay.
And again, this is when, you know, I'm wearing my veil. I've got like this little mini veil too. So, you know, we've got this on. We're blowing our smoker, which also I can address why these work so well. And once I do this and I'm pulling the frame out, I mean, the bees they're so preoccupied with taking care of the hive, whether it be, you know, feeding a baby bee, that they really don't mind me at all. But yes, the bees are actually on these frames while we're working it.
okay, and then they come back later and we put the frames back in?
Oh, you're talking about for the harvest of the honey? Or
Yes.
just oh, so yeah, so we have different devices that will actually send the bees down out of the honey box. There's something called a triangle escape, which is like a maze, where the bees are allowed to go through this hole and enter a maze down into the brood chamber. But once they enter the brood chamber, there's no way of making their way back through the maze to the honey box. So in that case, during the harvest, there's no bees in there. And if there are, I can brush some off, and yeah, they'll fly off and then fly back into the bottom portion of the hive. So, yes.
What if you wanted to house bees for the greater good? You didn't want to harvest the honey. Is
Yeah.
that like a weird question? Could you go through the same, would you use the same things to keep them alive? Like if you wanted to, because of their pollinators and you want to.
Sure.
Okay.
So for honeybees, I wouldn't recommend just sort of leaving a hive and letting it do its own thing. And they will do their own thing. I mean, I had a discussion with one of the parishioners here that, you know, when you release the hive or let it do its own thing, which they've been doing for thousands of years, they'll certainly survive. The issue with that is because the bees inside of a Langstroth hive are domestic. I don't want to call it domestication, but we've tried to regulate what they do. You could create an environment that has disease and certain pests that can impact not just this hive, but can spread to others. So my recommendation for somebody who says, well, you know, I love the concept of bees. I want to, you know, have pollinators to help my garden or to help my community. I would recommend raising mason bees or orchard bees. And by the way, that's something that really is good to address. There's 22,000 species of bees on planet Earth. 4,000 of those are in the United States, and 427 are in Pennsylvania alone. So we have 427 species of bee just in our state. The honeybee is one of those. The reason why there's such a diversity of bees is because each of those bees is really, it's grown through evolution to work with certain blossoms, right? So a good example would be a bumblebee. Bumblebees are wonderful for cucurbits, so cucumbers, squash, and also tomatoes, the nightshade family, eggplant as well. And the reason for that is because a lot of those plants, they only blossom in the morning, and that's when a bumblebee is up, as opposed to a lazy honeybee that's waiting for the sun to really warm it up. And also, those types of bees, they vibrate at a certain frequency, which it's the C note, is what I'm told for bumblebees, and that frequency is perfect for a tomato plant to release its pollen, right? So this is a relationship that they've created through evolution, but because of that, they're much better pollinators than honeybees would be for those particular plants. So I would recommend something like that. Orchard bees, they can pollinate at an efficacy that's 3 times more than a honeybee can when it comes to any sort of orchard plants, so apples, pears, peaches. They only survive or live for about 2 or 3 weeks, which is exactly when those plants are blooming. So I would always recommend to someone to look into the local indigenous bees we have. They're much more easier to take care of, and they do a great job. In some cases, better than honeybees do. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Yes.
I once read a warning about urban beekeeping, and is this true or not? The concern was bees are attracted to antifreeze, and there's lots of antifreeze in an urban environment as cars are leaking and so on. Did you find that your honey was polluted by antifreeze or other urban
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah, I've heard of this as well. Any sort of sweeteners or things that are sweet, the bees will generally be attracted to. That's really only if there's dearth. So if there's not enough in nature, they'll find a way. A good example of that for urban bees is there was during the dearth season, which is about mid-July through August, and it was just outside of Philadelphia. There was an M&M factory getting rid of all of this sort of M&Ms that didn't fit the bill, and there was a blue dye with it. Well, these bees, because of the dirt, had found this place, this factory, and they started sucking up all the blue dye sugar, and then they went back to their beehives and they made blue honey. So, there's a case where some sort of environmental, and I don't want to call that a pollutant, but it was out there and the bees brought it back. Now, believe it or not, the studies show that urban beekeeping has some of the best, cleanest honey. And the reason for that is because of the botanical diversity in most cities. The parks departments are really big about not spraying certain pesticides and insecticides, and also they push for diversity in the plant life that's there, but also a lot of urban settings have great urban gardening clubs. So you're going to get this diversity in plants there as well, which means the diversity in the food sources of pollen, which are good for the bees, and also you're going to get this great sort of spectrum on the palette of honeys that the bees can pull in urban settings. Now, personally, anecdotally, the best honey I had was when I was a beekeeper in Philly as well. And I've kept bees as far west as Chester County, as far south as Swarthmore, where I am now, and then obviously around here. Doesn't mean the honey's not great here, but the Philadelphia honey I had was fantastic. So,
I was reading something that because of the rise in milk alternatives like almond milk, a lot of beekeepers were taking hives to California to pollinate all of these almond trees, and it was causing a lot of stress on a large amount of beehives
that industry, they're transporting, you know, anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 beehives in the back of the truck. They're bringing those hives to the orange blossom in Florida, then over to the almonds in California, which, by the way, they're the only pollinators of almonds.
Okay, yeah.
So if the bees were to die, we would have no more almonds. Then they bring them up to Washington for the apples, and then over to Maine for the blueberries. I'm not sure if I got that in the right order, but that's the circuit that they run. Tons of stress on the bees, as you know, anyone would experience traveling around. When a beehive moves, the bees will leave and they do an orientation flight, where in a concentric circle they map out where they are. And speaking to what Art had talked about pattern identification, the bees are mapping out around the hive based on patterns. And they actually can tell how far away they are, not just based on the sun, but also on how fast objects of certain patterns are moving past their compound eyes. Wow. So they've done experiments where they've sent them to the tubes and had different patterns along the tubes in order to simulate mileage, and they found that when they released them in nature with these similar markers and patterns, that they were going those miles that were made in the lab, but actually outside. It's pretty amazing. So, just to finish up with that, so the stress of moving around and having to do an orientation flight every new apiary you go to or farm was a lot on the bees. The honey is being collected from them and sent to stores, and so in order to provide nourishment for the bees, they give them high fructose corn syrup that doesn't have the same enzymes as honey does, so it's impacting their gut health. And then also some of those places are sprayed with insecticides, that impacts their immune system, and also the lack of diversity in the plants, the nectar that they're drinking, also impacts their immune system. So because you know they're taking them to monocultures, they're, you know, an entire almond orchard, as opposed to bees having, you know, wildflowers, almond blossoms, and a variety of other things. So yes, ultimately that's impacting the bees' health, and that's a big deal for the commercial industry.
Are you concerned that could become an issue if that continues, or?
I would be concerned for the commercial honey production,
Yeah.
certainly. I mean, the United States actually has a honey surplus, like storage of honey, in case of a major world event where we would need to, you know, supply ourselves with honey and the bees are dead. So I would be concerned with certainly the ability for more than just local people to get honey.
Does it affect the population of bees?
In general, no, not overall.
Okay.
I mean, unfortunately, the insect population has diminished by a third over the past 4 years. And we're talking about the entire insect population in the United States, anyway. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of factors that are contributing to that, but I don't think that would be the one thing that would hurt the bee population anyway.
So this commercially produced honey that is from high fructose corn syrup or monoculture plants, does it have the same health benefits for humans?
So the honey that's taken out of the hives or what's used in commercial operations, and because that honey is the main food source of the bees, it's replaced with the high fructose corn syrup for them to eat.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, because for a normal beekeeper, we would harvest maybe, let's say, each of these boxes can have about 45 pounds of honey to 50. So I would harvest 50 pounds, but I have to ensure that the beehive has 50 pounds left on it going into winter. For those commercial beekeepers, they go, we don't need that. We'll just give them corn syrup to fill in what we've taken away. So like, no medicinal properties, obviously, to that.
We have one more question, because I think we have a lot of questions.
Yes, and I'll be here. I'll hang out here and answer any questions folks have. One more.
How do they pick a queen bee?
Oh boy, how do they pick a queen bee? So this is wonderful. They will take certain eggs and they will feed them an extended amount of something called royal jelly. All bees get royal jelly, but the queen eggs get royal jelly for 2 to 3 times longer than a normal bee would. The royal jelly has a juvenile growth hormone in it, and it's got some other stuff. But basically what it does is it ensures that the biology of the queen is different, and it's forming from egg, larva to pupa than any of the other bees. Now, when that queen bee emerges out of her queen cell, her cocoon, if you will, she'll make a piping sound, like a squeak, that lets all the other bees know the queen is here. But in doing so, other queens who have just emerged will hear that, and then they fight to the death.
Really?
And so they find each other, they fight. The queen that survives usually is the one that wins. However, you can have 2 queens in a hive, and they just don't find each other, in which case that queen will leave with a portion of the hive to start a new colony somewhere. But that's sort of how they're determined. Yeah, it is. It is. And there's a lot of